Hello, thank you for joining us. My name is John Christian. I'm the Director of Research and Outreach at the Global America Business Institute in Washington, D.C. We are delighted to have a conversation with Dr. Sang-hyun Lee, a Senior Research Fellow at the Sejong Institute located in Seoul, Korea, and he is also the President of the Korea Nuclear Policy Society. Dr. Lee, thank you for joining us today. Could you tell us a little bit about yourself and your work at the Sejong Institute and KNPS?
Well, it's my pleasure to have an interview with Gabi. And my title has changed a little bit. Now I'm the president of the Sejong Institute. My new position started in June this year. So as a president of the institute, I manage most of the research-related activities here. That Sejong Institute is South Korea's civilian independent think tank that does policy, security issue, and national unification issue. I'll serve as a president for the next 3 years. That's not my current position. And I also serve as the president of the Korean Nuclear Policy Society, KNPS. This is a kind of association among people who specialize in nuclear science and engineering, and policy people like myself. My background is international politics, so this is a kind of a good example how people on the science side and policy side can work together.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lee. The Biden administration has made climate change and clean energy a priority. What are your thoughts on his approach, and what would you like to see more of from the administration or from Congress overall?
Well, I'm not sure yet what will be nuclear policy of the Biden administration. But one thing seems clear, he is a pro-climate change person. And as I understand, mostly policy of the Democratic Party is a pro-environment. So on the line of that extension, probably Biden will also support clean energy, climate change policy, and pro-environment policy. And as we all know that nuclear policy, nuclear energy is a very important part of the carbon-free energy source. So if we combine that two sides of the fact observation, we can at least guess that Biden will also support the use and development of nuclear energy, but with a very strict safety standard, okay, and very strict environment standard. So I have some expectation, high expectation for the Biden administration because climate change is quite important issue for everybody on Earth. Okay, so how can we cut the carbon emission, and how can we struggle with the extreme weather changes? So this all touches the everyday life of all mankind, all men on Earth. And because of that, I would say that nuclear energy as an important carbon-free energy, perhaps we need to maximum utilize this. But as we see, we have a Fukushima accident and Chernobyl accident. So it's kind of a dangerous business. That's why we need more strict safety standard and more non-proliferation standard. So in the latest Moon Jae-in-Biden summit in joint statement, even though both parties pledged to work together at nuclear export market, they also make it clear that this should be go with a very clear safety standard, okay, additional protocol. So that's the way I think we should go in the future.
You talk about Biden and Moon statement. The Biden-Moon statement from a few months ago have pledged to work together on nuclear exports. How can we, the United States and Korea, work together on this issue?
Yeah, well, the situation is like this. South Korea has constructed lots of nuclear reactors, both in Korea and overseas. So right now we have about 23 nuclear power plants running. And mostly these technologies came from United States. So United States has most of the original technology about the nuclear power plant. South Korea imported this technology from Westinghouse. But unfortunately, United States did not have many experience in building, constructing nuclear power plant recently. Okay, so US does not have a supply chain, but South Korea has a lot of experience. So US original technology, South Korea's experience in constructing power plant. I think that's an ideal combination to work together. But recently, international civil nuclear export market is, how's the trend? What's the trend? Russia, China is almost dominating. So as long as I understand, at least more than 2/3 of the new power plant project is China and Russia taking away. So if these trends continues, sooner or later, we will see that China or Russian model renewable nuclear reactor will become a kind of a standard model for a nuclear power plant. But one thing uncertain is how can you sure about safety standard of the Russian and Chinese model? That's the big question. So that's why US and South Korea should work together to reverse that trend. US and China, Russia and China's domination of the nuclear spot market. We need to act urgently. That's why we think Korea and US did a collaboration in civil nuclear export market. We have lots of potential if we work together. US technology and US safety standards, and also financing. Maybe United States can offer best solution. South Korea, we have actual field training and expertise in actually building power plant. So that's our strength. And I think if we work together, we will have quite a competitive edge over China and Russia.
You mentioned China just a few times. China is going to be the first country to build a small modular reactor, the ACP-100. It's currently under construction and will come online in about 5 years, the first SMR to come online. What are the international implications for this from both the climate change perspective and geopolitically?
Well, it's kind of a concern that I have. China already taking the lead in developing advanced nuclear reactors. So we know that there's a lot of study and discussion about how can we develop SMR in both US and South Korea. For example, in the United States, NuScale, TerraPower, and also in South Korea, Smart SMR. Still, we don't have any actual construction of the commercial basis of this model, but China is already taking the lead. So it's kind of a alarming trend, I think. If, as I mentioned, if this trend continues, sooner or later, China or Russian SMR model will also dominate the market. So this has a very significant implication for both US and South Korea. Perhaps what we need is a more urgent, a sense of urgency to tackle this issue. And I look at the location of the China's new SMR. One is in Hainan and another one is in Shandong. Mostly they are located in the coastal area of China. So if one of the potential concern for South Korea, what happens if some accidents occurs in China's nuclear reactor, which is located on the coastline, then its damage will completely come to the Korean Peninsula. So South Korea is quite concerned about safety standard of Chinese reactors. And China will argue that their model is the state-of-the-art and best model. But eventually, market will prove that. So let's look at what will happen in the future.
You mentioned earlier about Korea's nuclear program. President Moon Jae-in began his presidency as an advocate for shutting down Korea's nuclear power plants. And during his presidency, Korea has signed deals to export nuclear reactors to other countries. At the end of his presidency, we have seen him become silent on nuclear and even plan for nuclear expansion. What do you think President Moon's overall legacy will be on nuclear energy?
Well, in the early days of the Moon Jae-in administration, his nuclear policy has been named the nuclear phase-out policy. The basic rationale is like this: nuclear energy is dangerous, as we witnessed the accident in Fukushima, and also recently, even though South Korean Peninsula is a relatively safe zone for earthquake, but some of the locations in South Korea, southern part, like Gyeongju, and there are many nuclear power plants. Recently, that area was hardly hit with the earthquake. So. And also, what happened during the previous government, Park Geun-hye, made a big accident, okay, like sinking of the Sewol ferry. So in overall, in Korean society, the public concern for safety is quite important issue. So on that basis, Moon Jae-in government tried to phase out nuclear power plant. Okay, but at the same time, as you mentioned exactly, South Korean government, nevertheless, Korean government is trying to promote nuclear export. South Korea successfully exported 3 nuclear power plants to the UAE. So what is the legacy? Perhaps that's the policy inconsistency. Korean government officially try to phase out from nuclear energy for the next 60 years, but at the same time, try to promote the nuclear export in foreign market. So how can we explain this inconsistency? So I think even though South Korea has a good potential to compete in international market, but this policy inconsistency will eventually will be quite a negative impact for South Korea's leverage. So what I need is that also South Korean government must have a little more realistic energy plan. MOTI, which is Ministry of Trade, Industry, and Energy. This is the agency that governs the South Korea's long-term energy plan. Its latest plan about a long-term electricity supply and demand plan. Target electricity mix for the 2030. It looks like this: coal 36%. Nuclear, 23.9%. Right now, it is almost 30%, 27% something, but it will gradually decrease. And after 60 years, perhaps there'll be no more nuclear power plant. That's the plan. But I think it's quite unrealistic because South Korea is an energy deficit country. We have to import all oils from all foreign country. Okay, how can we meet that challenge? So Moon government nuclear phase policy is working like this. They canceled construction of a new reactors plant at level 6, and they prohibited a life extension of all the reactors for power plant. Okay, this is the current situation in South Korea. And I think if Moon Jae-in government does not clear its policy stance on nuclear issue, perhaps the next government will have a lot of controversy over this issue.
You mentioned the next government. Moon Jae-in only has a few more months left in his administration. Mm-hmm. So what are you looking for in next year's elections in terms of nuclear energy? Many candidates are pro-nuclear energy, but are some more enthusiastic about nuclear than others?
Well, roughly speaking, in Korea, liberals are anti-nuclear energy. I don't know why, but anyhow, in current Moon Jae-in government, the environmentalist or NGO activists has a quite strong voice. And in comparison, most of the conservative candidates, they prefer market-oriented approach, which means that they have some positive view about nuclear energy as well. So it may be too early to talk about what would be next Korea's president's attitude about nuclear energy policy. But given the fact that this nuclear phase policy is part of the liberal political ideology in Korea, perhaps this will be quite a big debate issue in presidential election. Well, actually, one of the conservative candidates, Mr. Choi Jae-hyung, who was a former inspector general in Korea, he's running for the presidential seat. He had some trouble with the Moon government because he led the investigation surrounding the decision to down one of the nuclear power plants in South Korea, Walsung power plant. So given that perhaps this issue, nuclear phase policy will be a big controversy in upcoming South Korean presidential election.
Taking a step back from the US and Korea, you've written quite a bit on the Quad, which is the US, India, Japan, and Australia. Is there potential for the Quad to expand cooperation to include energy security?
Well, I would say that there's no reason to not talk about energy security issue in Quad. As you see, Quad is a kind of a flexible group of like-minded partners dedicated to advancing a common vision and to ensuring peace and prosperity. This is the exact statement that came out Washington Post column after first Quad summit in March this year. So most of the people are concerned that whether Quad will be will evolve into a anti-China military coalition. But most of the people indicate that there is little possibility about it. So rather, Quad will be a mechanism to discuss a common, non-traditional security issues for the time being. Okay, so energy energy security can be an important issue on Quad agenda. The reason is obvious. India also needs India is a growing country. It will need lots of energy. So India's continues industrialization and urbanization. What does that mean? This country will need huge energy in the future. And perhaps fossil fuel will not be enough. Nuclear energy will be another answer. And look at Japan after the Fukushima accident. Since then, the utilization of the nuclear energy has been a little bit setback, but it's recovering. And also, I look at the statistics, and it seems to me in 2010, Japan imported 84% of its energy from overseas. South Korea has a similar situation. Okay? We have to import all oils from foreign country. Perhaps the percentage of renewable energy, this will not be that much as government expect. So what does that mean? How can we fill that deficit, energy deficit here? Perhaps we need to have to think about utilizing potential of nuclear energy. I think that's the right way to go, given the climate change demand.
You mentioned India. Because India never ratified the Non-Proliferation Treaty and they have nuclear weapons, should they have such easy access to nuclear energy? And should the US continue to advocate for their inclusion in multilateral export control regimes like the Nuclear Suppliers Group?
Well, I would say let's acknowledge the reality. India and Pakistan is de facto nuclear weapons states. We all know that they have nuclear weapons. Okay. So is it fair to treat India and Pakistan continue to be outside of the international nuclear non-proliferation regime? I think that doesn't have any merit. So let's accept the reality. So let's accept India and Pakistan as a nuclear weapon state, even though they are outside the NPT framework. Rather, why don't you bring them into the proliferation regime and ask them behave more transparently? In that sense, perhaps it might be a wise approach to bring India and Pakistan into the existing non-proliferation regime and multilateral export regime like a nuclear supply group. So I think that's the more efficient way to handle in India and Pakistan in the future. So even though it's not comfortable to accept India and Pakistan as a legitimate nuclear weapon states, I would say it's not right. But reality is not just that. Okay. So let's look at the reality and rather treat them as a de facto nuclear weapon state and ask them behave more transparently and more legitimately in the existing framework of the international governance. I think that will be the right way to go with.
I have just one more question for you, if you don't mind. What would you like to see Korea's relationship with the Quad?
Well, some of the reservation here in Korea is that some people argue like this. If South Korea joined the Quad, this will mean that South Korea is becoming a part of the anti-China military coalition. But as I mentioned, there's a little possibility that Quad will evolve into any military coalition. The reason is quite simple. India's position is quite important. India opposes any militarization of the Quad. India demands inclusiveness of the Quad system. So this is kind of an open and free mechanism to discuss some common security or non-security issues in the region. So having said that, South Korea, there's no reason that South Korea to hesitate joining the Quad. So US prefers to expand the Quad into Quad Plus. And I think Korea is one of the candidates the US is considering to as a member. And I always argue that if this is not anti-China military coalition. South Korea should join it and maximum utilize some sort of the multilateral collaboration mechanism in working in Quad. And I think already South Korea Quad in latest Quad summit, leaders agreed to create a working group, right? Expert group like climate change and other group. So like a vaccine expert. Why don't we shouldn't we join this? This will quite a benefit for every country by working together with that through that mechanism.
Dr. Lee, this was just delightful. Thank you so much for joining us.
Okay, thank you. It was my pleasure. Bye.